June the 21st, 1942, +0530 hours, the eastern perimeter, Tobruk, Libya. The first light of the Saharan sun cuts through the haze like a knife, casting a golden glow over the endless sand dunes. But there is no beauty here, only the terrible taste of cordite and diesel fuel, the deafening scream of Stuka dive bombers as they soar overhead, their sirens wailing in the darkness. You can almost feel the earth tremble under your feet as the Panzer E tanks of the 15th Panzer Division move forward, spewing up clouds of sand as their treads rip through the desert. Here comes the Desert Fox himself, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, standing out in his SESD KFSB 250 half-track, his eyes peering through his binoculars, his trademark goggles pushed up on his forehead, drops of perspiration form on his brow, despite the early morning hour, as the heat is already building, unforgiving. Around this Desert Fox, his Afrika Korps tide moves like a precision machine. Veteran soldiers of the 90th Light Division, Bersaglieri units of the Italian forces, their distinctive helmets sporting their trademark feathers, all forcing their way through the wire obstacles and minefields that the British 8th Army had deemed impassable. Explosions burst like flowers of death, the 150mm howitzers of the Axis forces firing their shells into the defenses, their British counterparts, the 25-pounders, firing back in defiance, their shells whistling through the air before striking the oncoming wave. Rommel's voice rises above the confusion, barking orders into his radio. Forward TS, break through the line, flank the strong points. He seems to be everywhere, issuing orders to the 21st Panzer Division to take advantage of a weakness discovered by recon, encouraging the infantry to push forward, even with the heavy machine gun fire pouring from the bunkers of the South African 2nd Division. The bullets ricochet off the armor plating surrounding him. A half-track behind him erupts into flames, anti-tank rounds slamming home, men tumbling out, screaming in agony. But Rommel doesn't miss a beat. For him, this is his moment, the culmination of weeks of planning, ever since the victory at Gazala, where he'd outmaneuvered General Neil Ritchie and sent his enemy reeling. In the fortress itself, there is pandemonium in the ranks of the Allies. Major General Hendrik Klupper, the commander of the garrison in Tobruk, paces in his underground command center, maps scattered across a wobbly table, lit by flickering lanterns. Hold the line, he cries into the field phone, but the news pouring in is terrible. The Indian 11th Brigade is breaking under the onslaught, their Bren guns hot from firing continuously. The Coldstream Guards dig in, sandbags towering above their heads, but the superiority of the Axis powers in the air. Ju-87 Stuka bombers swooping in waves, their bombs pitting the perimeter, knocking out gun emplacements one by one. As the sun rises higher, the gap expands. Rommel's tanks pour through like a burst floodgate, spreading out to encircle the port. Italian Ariete Division's armored cars dash ahead, cutting off escape routes, while German engineers blow holes through the minefields using Bangalore torpedoes. As mid-morning approaches, the battles become mere house-to-house combat within the battered streets of Tobruk. The clicks of snipers targeting officers, the thud of grenades hurled at foxholes. A British Matilda tank lurches out to strike back, its cannons firing thunderously, annihilated in an instant by swarming Pak-38 anti-tank guns. Rommel feels the thrill of victory in the air, this high that he loves. However, in the midst of victory, he is about to face something unexpected in this seized headquarters, something that will destroy his illusions. While securing the harbors, filled with boxes and transport, murmurs rise about documents seized from a British staff car. What do they contain? Can they reveal not only an advantageous position in war, but also the dark reality of defeat? By early afternoon, the Union Jack flying over Tobruk Fortress now slumps in surrender. White flags wave from pocked bunkers as 33,000 Allied soldiers, theirs is a motley crew of British, South African, and Indian soldiers, lay down arms and march into captivity under the watchful gaze of Afrika Korps troops. They have the port. Rommel walks through the charred streets, crunching boots on broken glass and used cartridges, past burned-out Crusader tanks and still 6-pounders. His troops shout in salutes as he passes, rough voices bellowing Heil Rommel. But the Desert Fox doesn't even notice. He's already thinking of Cairo, of the Suez Canal, of the radiant goal now so close at hand. In the captured headquarters building, a low concrete structure buried in sand, a torrent of German intelligence officers pours like bees out of a honeycomb. Captain Albert Guzzi of the 90th Light Division's ISEC section kicks open a safe fixed into the wall. Files labeled most secret operational orders, warm overlay maps straight from the plotting table, a staff card deserted in the route provides further booty, briefcases bursting with charts, convoy plans force returns of the entire 8th Army. Guzzi's gaze widens as he turns pages. He summons his chief, Major Friedrich von Mellenthin, the brilliant Ike chief of Rommel. Von Mellenthin bursts in, dust, crusted greatcoat flapping wildly, and scatters the papers across a battered wooden desk under the harsh illumination of a single swinging bulb. It is easy to imagine it. Smoke-filled air thick with cigarette smoke and a hint of iron. Bright blood from a wounded messenger bandaged in the corner. Rommel himself appears a few moments later, doffing his cap and wiping sweat from his face with a handkerchief. "What have you discovered, Mellenthin?" The Major spells out the trophy in intimate detail, faithfully recapitulating what the Major has said in his message. It begins, "A signals intercept summary of American Lend-Lease shipments already unloading at Suez, hundreds of brand new M3 Grant tanks with 75mm guns, boxes of 105mm artillery, thousands of tons of aviation fuel. Then the order of battle for the follow. Through on Operation Crusader, General Bernard Montgomery is on his way from Britain to assume command, with new divisions and an avalanche of supplies in tow. Pipeline statistics indicate a step up from 40,000 tons to over 100,000 tons a month, and the battle maps overlays in red and blue ink tracing areas of assembly already bloated with reinforcements east of El Alamein, far in excess of anything the Afrika Korps can bring to bear. Rommel leans forward, tracing patterns with a muffled finger. Across the room, a heavy silence prevails, punctuated only by the faraway rattle of prisoners being led away. Von Mellenthin indicates a single sheet of paper upon which is listed projected Allied strength for October: more than 1,000 tanks, 900 aircraft, a magazine of ammunition measured in hundreds of rounds per gun. The Axis strength, hastily scribbled on a corner of the paper in red ink by a British staff officer, paints a contrasting picture: Panzer Army Africa with only 200 working runners, fuel sufficient for only 10 days of fighting, air support down to a handful of worn-out Bf-109s. Both men master their emotions and engage each other serenely. These are their intentions, Rommel says finally. Long pause. The light bulb flickers. Outside, the hot wind shakes the windows. Rommel stands up carefully, expression impassive at first. But those close to him, von Mellenthin for example, or his adjutant, Berntint, note the progress of the transition, the contraction around the eyes, the slight tightening of the jaw muscles. There is still the triumph of the victory to be found in the distant cheers outside the walls, but in this subterranean lair, surrounded as they are by the spoils of victory, something chilly lingers in the atmosphere. What does the Desert Fox actually find in the recovered pages? How is this moment going to turn his whole experience in Africa topsy-turvy? Rommel remains motionless over his desk, the documents spread out before him like a death sentence, penned in tidy British typewriter script. There is no sound now, none. The calls of victory have faded away, and instead the murmur of the generator and the scratch of von Mellenthin's pencil can be heard. You can almost taste the grit of the air, feel the pressure of the North African afternoon bearing down through the concrete ceiling. He turns back to the page once more. American deliveries, 300 cubic meter Grant tanks already in theater, and a further 400 by August. Multiple prototypes of the Sherman tank on their way as well. Aviation fuel in the hundreds of thousands of gallons. And then the figures which cut so painfully close. The Allied air forces are expected to reach a daily total of 1,200 sorties by autumn, while the Stukas and Messerschmitts of the Luftwaffe number fewer than 200 serviceable planes throughout the entire Mediterranean theater of operation. Rommel's fuel supplies, 1,200 tons of it in reserve, enough for 3 days of maximum operation, or perhaps 4, provided he doesn't move. General Mellenthin clearing his throat. Herr Marshal, these figures are confirmed from a variety of sources. The British have been tracking our supply ships with remarkable precision. Rommel nods slowly but says nothing. He is wrapped on one phrase: 8th Army to receive priority over all other theaters for Lend-Lease material until further notice. Priority in Europe, on the Eastern Front, everywhere. For an instant, the Desert Fox is elsewhere. It is visible, Arabia's glint passing over the equation as the numbers turn icy in his mind. His style had always been audacity, speed, and the strength of weakness transformed into virtue. Ghazala. Cauldron for the wire dash. It has all been predicated upon the belief that the British were brittle, their communications longer, and that time favored the German cause. But these documents rage against that notion. Now time is the foe. Each passing week, each passing day, swings the pendulum further against him. There is no retreat for the Allies. They are creating an avalanche. He finally speaks, his voice low, almost a monotone. We've kicked the door wide open for Egypt, but behind it lies an army we're no match for with what we've got. And mate. Von Mellenthin swaps a glance with Burnt. They've never heard the general talk like that. Not after Austerlitz reduced to scale at Gazala. Not after outmaneuvering the whole Gazala line. The man who had once penned a letter from the desert floor, writing of meeting his Cairo within weeks, now pored over charts outlining Cairo lost to him forever. Rommel takes an overlay in his hands, holds it up to the light. Red arrows, Allied build, up points stretch from Alexandria down to the Qattara Depression. Blue arrows, his planned assault look weak by comparison. Vulnerable, childlike against the red wash. He lays the overlay on the desk as if it might burn his fingers. These must be forwarded to OK at once, he instructs, and we must call for every drop of gas, every spare engine, every plane that Berlin can give us. They all know the reply that follows. Russia is draining the Reich dry. Africa is but a diversion. He swings from the desk and walks to the small slit of a window overlooking the harbor. His soldiers are unloading their taken British supplies, tins of bully beef, boxes of cigarettes, even chocolates. Irony bites sour. His men are cheering their good fortune, oblivious to the fact that what they think is their greatest prize in that room has now doomed their cause. Rommel stands watching them for a moment, watching the sunlight catch the Mediterranean out beyond the docks. Though far out there, beyond their sight on the horizon, yet approaching Suez even as they watch, are convoys laden with the means for their defeat. But what will the Desert Fox do with this terrible knowledge? Will he fight on, recognizing the end is written in these pages, or will there be one desperate throw of the dice before the storm breaks? July 1942, the Africa Corps moves east once more, their engines roaring down the blistering coastal highway towards the Nile. Rommel knows the clock is ticking. The seized documents sear in his brain like a fuse. Each mile won now is borrowed time against the coming tempest. He goads his men onward. The head of the advance, the 15th and 21st Panzer Divisions, the 90th Light Division, thundering along on foot and in trucks, the Italian divisions laboring to keep up. Fuel wagons are emptied and left behind, water rationed to mouthfuls. The soldiers nickname it the Rommel Rush, but this time there's a hollow sound to their courage. You sense the tiredness, the soldiers with sunken eyes, their uniforms pristine white with salt and sand, their mouths parched from the Hamsin wind that cuts fine abrasive grit into every crevice. Rommel himself hardly gets to sleep, puffing nervously on endless pack after pack of cigarettes in the command vehicle, poring over the same maps under the faint glow of the dashboard light. He cables Berlin repeatedly. In the absence of robust reinforcements and fuel, the army will face annihilation. The imports are courteous, non-committal. Russia absorbs all. By late July, his spearheads come in sight of the slight rise at El Alamein, just 60 miles from Alexandria. It is here that the desert squeezes into a narrow strip between the Mediterranean on the northern side and the Qattara Depression, impenetrable on the other. End of maneuvering space, flanking movements. This is the squeeze. And confronting him, digging in with desperate haste, are General Claude Inlich's 8th Army, already bolstered by those American grants from the Tobruk files, artillery units, and Kitty Shock air support overhead. But Rommel presses on anyway. Alamein Ridge is about to become the pivot. On the night of the 30th, under a moonless sky, the panzers move forward again. One can almost hear the tortured scream of overextended Maybach engines, the stink of hot oil and explosives as the 88mm flag guns start blasting in direct fire. For an instant, there is the swivel-eyed excitement of the previous battle, the Italian Littorios bursting through minefields, the panzers swinging south to encircle the ridge, but the British are not caught napping this time. Montgomery is there, silent and deliberate, analyzing the ground like a master game player. His 22nd Armored Brigade is dug in and hauled down positions, his 6-pounders hidden in the bushes. The turning of the tables is quick. The Grants, sporting their lengthy 75mm guns, have better range than the Panzer II tanks. Now the bombers of the RAF pound the Axis troops during the daylight hours, while at night, bright lights illuminate the battlefield as if it were daylight. Fuel is running low, so instead of reaching the top of the ridge, Rommel is forced to stop. His ammunition is also running low. By September the 3rd, the assault dies out, and the tanks are aflame as the infantry retreats. Rommel is standing on top of a small dune, observing how his panzers smoke as he is aware that he is not experiencing just a mere setback. He becomes ill, stomach problems, fatigue, the burden of necessity. September the 23rd, he flies to Germany, officially for his treatment, unofficially to appeal to Hitler in person for supplies that everyone knows will never materialize. The Heinkel 111 banks over the Mediterranean, and Rommel gets his final glimpse of the coastal strip where his legend had been born. The 8th Army, meanwhile, is getting ever stronger, tanks pouring ashore, divisions pouring in, Montgomery preparing the counterattack that will be known by his name. Again on Earth, von Mellenthin and the remaining members of his staff observe the horizon fill with dust clouds of Allied patrols. They realize what Rommel realized in that dingy office at Tobruk. The Desert War was no longer a campaign of maneuver and boldness. It had become an arithmetic of attrition, and one that the Axis can never win. In fact, when the final avalanche occurs at El Alamein in October, how extensive is the defeat? What is the cost for Rayner's men and the glory of this June day? October the 23rd, 1942, 2,140 hours, El Alamein line. There is a deceptive calm over the night desert, punctuated only by the occasional flare falling through its parachute, throwing eerie shadows among the minefields. And then, abruptly, the world ignites. More than 900 British guns, 25-pounders, 4.5s, 105s from the Americans cut loose simultaneously. The earth, tremoring barrage that lasts for hours. You can feel it punching through your ribcage, the drumbeat pounding, shells screaming overhead to slam into Axis lines in a firestorm of steel that goes on for hours. Field Marshal Rommel is 2,000 miles away, in a hospital bed at Semmering, Austria, gazing ceilingward as the telegrams accumulate. He has just gotten back to Germany when the news reaches him. Montgomery has attacked. General George Stumme, his provisional successor, leads the Panzer Army back in Africa, but life is not kind to him. Stumme has a heart attack during the first barrage and dies in his command car, leaving a confusion of command until General Wilhelm Ritter von Thoma assumes command. On the ground, the soldiers of the Afrika Korps huddle in shallow trenches, their faces against the sand, taking the beating of the bombardment that reduced the desert landscape into a moonscape of craters. It is the soldiers of the Trento and Bologna division who suffer most of the punishment along the northern front, their lines annihilated, soldiers lying entombed or fleeing for their lives. German grenadiers of Theon 6-4 Light Division desperately cling to their lines, their prayers whispered when the sky illuminates like noonday from the creeping barrage advancing methodically. The infantry goes in at 2,200, Australian 9th Division on the right, Kiwis and South Africans in the middle, and on the left, the Highlanders of the 51st, all moving through corridors bulldozered through the minefields masks of that screaming artillery. Mine detectors and Bengal torpedoes lead off the assault, sparks flying as the charges explode. Close and brutal fighting, the crack of Tommies and MG42s, grenades exploding in the trenches, and screams through the darkness. By dawn on the 24th, Montgomery's troops have dug deep, but they have yet to break through. The urgent summons from Hitler reaches Rommel himself, whose plane flies through Allied air patrols over the Mediterranean, touching down in Crete before proceeding on to Africa. When finally the earth beneath his feet approaches Deba on October the 25th, the weariness etched upon his features is chiseled deeper than ever. The report from von Mellenthin in the tent: ammunition sufficient for 30 rounds per gun, fuel sufficient for 2 days, more than 200 tanks already lost or under repair, strikes Rommel with grim directness. Rommel looks over the maps illuminated only by a petrol lantern light. This is exactly as the captured Tobruk documents had forecast, together with 1,000 tanks of their 8th Army, bottomless shell supplies, and uncontested air dominion. Meanwhile, his strength is a pathetic 100 functioning German tanks against 1,000 of theirs, and Italian armor antique and useless against most modern models. He knows the math is cruel, but is determined to surrender nothing readily to the picture of this desert war that is unfolding before him. There are counterattacks. 15th Panzer and Littorio Division hurling itself against Australian salient points Kidney Ridge and Point 29. For days the battle swirled, the maelstrom of dust, fire, and blood. The troopers of Rommel fight with the desperation of damned men, 88mm artillery firing in sighting range and tanks ramming theirs home with suicidal charges, but each blow weakens them to nothing. On November the 2nd, Montgomery sets in motion Operation Supercharge, the death blow. The Kiwis and 1st Armored punch through in the south, shattering Italian lines and turning towards the open desert. Rommel foresees the finish. November the 3rd, the strength of the army is exhausted. Annihilation is only a question of time. Hitler's answer is infamous. Victory or death, no retreat. Rommel eyes the message, then gives the order to withdraw, conserving what is left of his battle-hardened veterans for the next installment to Tunisia. As the survivors of the Afrika Korps retreat west under the constant bombardment of RAF fighters, burning trucks littering the countryside, silent graves dotting the road, the Desert Fox sits in the rear car of his open motorcade, his eyes on the horizon where all his ambition had once lain. The glory of Tobruk, barely 5 months ago, now seems like ages off. But what happened to Erwin Rommel after the desert consumed his legend? And how did that one instance in a combat headquarters resonate throughout the conflict? The memory of November 1942 melts into the long retreat. The Afrika Korps, once a desert of doom to British and Australian troops, moves westward in a cobbled column miles long, pestered every waking hour by Spitfires and Bostons of the Desert Air Force. Easy to picture, columns of sweaty trucks, crippled panzers towed by half-tracks, weary troops marching along side by side, their faces etched hollow beneath their metal dome helmets. Blazing cars dot the landscape like monuments of sorrow. Rommel rides through it all in his customary Dorchester command truck, an unctuous observer of it all, a onlooker rather than a participant. But by January 1943, what's left of the force crosses into Tunisia, connecting with von Arnim's just arrived 5th Panzer Army. There is for an instant hope for a new line at Mareth, for a redoing of the old tricks. But the Desert Fox has one last trick up his sleeve, Kasserine Pass. His battle-hardened troops burst through green American soldiers of I Corps in February, sending Sherman stumbling back in flames and Gies running for cover in panic. The old trick works again and again, bold flanking maneuvers, massed panzer assaults, the Desert Fox leading from the front. But no matter the numbers, the Allies spring back into action, pouring more troops into the mosh pit, more armor, more planes. By spring, even Rommel realizes he is caught in the Tunisian trap, squeezing from both sides. On March the 9th, 1943, he leaves the continent for the final time. He is called to Rastenburg by the Führer, awarded the diamonds to the Knight's Cross, the highest award for the old victories. Yet the talk that follows is not pleasant. Rommel says what he thinks: Africa is irretrievable. Italy will soon follow unless the Reich reduces its front and begins preparations to defend itself in Europe. He is waved off, sent home on extended sick leave. The Desert Fox is rendered ineffective, his counsel disregarded. Back in Harlingen, Rommel is penning letters to his wife, Lou, taking walks through the Swabian hills, reading reports that verify all the things he saw in that office in Tobruk. The avalanche he caught a glimpse of in June has turned into a flood, American industry churning out ships, planes, and tanks faster than the Luftwaffe can destroy them. Soviet troops flooding the Eastern Front, the bomber offensive reducing German cities to rubble. In 1944, he leads Army Group B in France, preparing for the inevitable invasion. The old aggression is moderated now, entrenched troops, minefields, and prudent use of remaining panzer troops. As D-Day dawns on June the 6th, his troops fight stubbornly, but it is only too routine. Superior Allied equipment, total air superiority, and an endless supply of troops. Caen is turned into a killing tube, and the Bocage countryside becomes a charnel house for tanks. Rommel leads the troops every day, evading Jabos fighter bombers, exhorting his troops to resist. Then, on July the 17th, his staff car is attacked by Spitfires near Liverot. Glass and bullets rip through his skin, but he holds on, hurt, with a fractured head. Hospital beds. Again, and in the nighttime, the remembering of Tobruk comes back, more acute than before. The war is lost. Not just Africa, not just Normandy, but the whole stakes. Whispers of a plot to turn against and depose Hitler, to spare Germany from complete annihilation reach him. Rommel listens, pauses, ultimately signs on. October the 14th, 1944, .2 generals call on him in his Harlingen house, carrying promises of immunity from Hitler for either taking his own life in honor or facing trial for the July the 20th plot reusable challenges. His selection of the poison pill comes during his car ride that ensues. No heroic struggle to the end, just a quiet death for the man who shook the desert. Official explanation: died from wounds sustained during the strafing. That one afternoon in a dusty room in Tobruk, the maps in his possession proving the British intentions had shown the Desert Fox a glimmering future more clearly than any fight. From the exhilaration of triumph on the 21st of June 1942 to the silence of the 14th of October 1944, the Desert Fox knew the end and chose to fight despite the doom.